Welcome back to our series, How Then Shall We Live, with the topic being Americanism and Christianity. This is part 3, so enjoy the conversation that I have with Pastor Matt. You alluded to this earlier about the pride that we have is basically a sin that we all have. Just happen to be Americans, we have a lot of it. And I don't want to have this be a downer for America, but that's not the purpose of this. But there's a widespread belief that, and I've heard it many times, that because of the sins of America's past, the big one being slavery, is God paying us back right now? And are we reaping what we've sown?
Sin always has consequences. But I would say the big sin isn't slavery. America's big sin is pride. And I would say that it's worked its way out in some pretty awful ways. Slavery was one of those, right? So you have people who believe that they're superior, that because of their intellect or because of their upbringing or because of whatever, that they are somehow in a category above folks that come from a different corner of the world. And I think that's awful, but it's pride. Pride is what drives that. And I think pride is at the heart of our country. And honestly, it shouldn't surprise us that we see where we are today, because when you go back to the garden and you look at the sin in the garden, that there was a curse on not only on mankind, but on the planet because of our sin, and that everything that we look at is in a state of dying. Everything that we look at is in a state of dying. And so even our democracy, our country, whether you think it's a great country, whether you think it's not so great a country, whatever your thoughts are on America, it's dying. It's the ideals that you start with, as pure as those might be, or impure or whatever, they're always going to begin to decay. And so you have a group of guys, and you might think, wow, we are all moral, upstanding people, and we all want the same thing. It doesn't take a generation before that changes. In fact, I think I was telling you, by the time you had the second presidential election, whenever Thomas Jefferson was running, the whole rhetoric there was, if he gets elected, then the whole country's going to hell, and if he doesn't, then Are
you saying that's not a new idea?
I'm saying that's been a part of our republic since the beginning, and so it shouldn't surprise us. I think what happens is that I think the church has tied themselves so tightly to this American ideal. We've really thought this was our country. We thought we were a Christian country. It hit me yesterday as I was thinking about this. When we look at different groups that say, well, we want equal access, why wouldn't we give it to them? Why wouldn't we say, again, in an American system, why wouldn't we say your definition of marriage is the same as equal to mine? Why is mine better than yours in an American system? Why is my version of what's prosperity different than yours? Why would we have any kind of a hierarchy within our society in a purely democratic thing that everybody's equal? And if that's true, then that means that my ideas about right and wrong and your ideas about right and wrong, whether they're biblically informed or not, that we should give them both the same credence. So if you think abortion's okay and I think it's wrong, why can I tell you that why should I be able to tell you what to do?
Well, I have my rights.
But that's democracy. Mm-hmm. That's what democracy says. And if you really play that out to the nth degree, the reason we're upset is things aren't going our way. They're going somebody else's way.
Right.
But if they were going our way, they would be upset because it's going our way. And that's the whole thing, is we're not a biblical or we're not a Christian nation. We're a very secular and I would say godless nation, right? We've taken God out of schools. We've taken him out of sporting events. We've taken, prayers out, all of those things that at one time there may have been a Christian influence in this country. And that's not to say that there aren't Christians in the country and that we can't have an influence and that we shouldn't be trying to be Daniels or Esthers or Josephs in the situations that we're in. But it's to say that if we're under the impression that this is a Christian country and somehow we're losing our Christianity because things didn't go our way in the election or whatever, I would say the reality is this hasn't been a Christian country. This is this is not the kingdom. And when you think it is, truth, justice in the American way, when you think truth and justice, and I'm just looking for righteousness to reign in the land, that ain't going to happen.
Right.
You're not going to elect the right president. You're not going to get the right representatives. You're never going to get to that point.
So it's obvious we're very divided right now.
Mm-hmm.
Just from what you're saying, what you think is right, what I think is right, what they think is right. Everyone thinks they have the right to change the other person's mind, and they should have control of what the other person does.
Mm-hmm.
Now, anytime around an election time or the 4th of July, I hear the verse in 2 Chronicles being quoted a lot about if we humble ourselves, God will heal our land. And we talked about that.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked your perspective on it because it always felt like this was a magic formula that we need to pray this and then God's going to fix everything.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what that verse is all about?
Mm-hmm.
Or is there a different meaning to it?
Okay, so 2 Chronicles 29, right? If my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, and I'll hear their prayer, forgive their sin, and heal their land. That's written to the nation of Israel, right? And the land is specific to that promise, and that's the land of Israel. So when people quote that, the problem is back to what I was saying before. We think it's a Christian nation. We think we're that land. We think we're the shining city on the hill. We think we're the New Jerusalem. And so we're thinking that if we do the right things, then God is going to somehow heal America. And the reality is that that promise was made to the Israelites, and it was very specific to bringing them back into the land. Now, is there a general principle to say that if God's people, if they're humbling themselves and they're praying and they're seeking after God, that God then visits them in unique ways and not necessarily going to give you all the things that you're looking for, but that God sees that humility and that God visits and in some ways, first and second great awakenings that happen in this country, I think because people did that. But the reality is, in the New Testament, and actually throughout the whole Bible, our expectation isn't to be on the winning side. If I'm looking at it from an earthly perspective, it's always going to look like I'm losing. And it's going to look like I'm losing because I'm suffering. It's going to look like I'm losing because I'm being persecuted. It's going to look like I'm losing because I'm not getting revenge and I'm not winning, right? I'm not doing all the things that the world says that you have to do to stay on top. I'm actually turning the other cheek. I'm actually giving my preferences and giving up my rights so that someone else can win or so that someone else can prosper. In Revelation, when we get to this, we'll see this too. In Daniel. So God's people have been warned over and over and over again. Stop being naughty. Stop your wicked ways. Turn back to me, or exile's coming. They refuse to listen. Finally, the Babylonians come in. They wipe out Jerusalem. Babylonians are followed by the Persians by the Greeks by the Romans. Daniel has this vision of these kingdoms, these successive kingdoms that are going to come, and each one will overtake the other one until finally there is a kingdom that comes, a rock that's cut out of a mountain without hands that crushes this statue, right? This big statue that they see. And it's a picture of God's kingdom that ultimately fills the earth. Every human kingdom will fall. America will fall at some point. We are part of the Roman kingdom, if you want to call it that. We are the vestiges of what was left of Rome. And so in the book of Revelation, when you see the armies of the beast and you see this great battle that's happening, America isn't the victor in it. America isn't the good guys. America is actually supporting the beast and fighting against the Lord when he comes. And so in that saying, a lot of times we don't like to hear that we're not the winners. That's just not the American way. We're the people that wear the capes, right? We're the ones with big red, white, and blue across their chest. But the reality is that every earthly kingdom will ultimately fall to the one kingdom, right? To the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. America is not a Christian nation. It hasn't been since its founding. It's been heavily influenced by Christianity. And I think that there's been Christian fingerprints on the nation, but I think those have become less and less and less and less and less obvious. And so for folks who grew up with the idea that we live in this society that's just and that's a truth and that those are the highest ideals, and that if I go the voting thing and I cast my vote, then my vote is over here and it's counted and it means something to somebody and somehow I'm a part of this democratic process. The reality is that there have been political intrigues and there have been overthrows of governments, and there's been the fall of great nations and all those things throughout history. It's all the birth pangs that Jesus talks about, that there's wars and rumors of wars. And so we really shouldn't be surprised in our day when we see some of those things happen. We're just surprised because we're not used to losing.
All right. So I do want to end on a little bit of encouragement, but we're going to go down to a little bit further level of depression where we're at right now, because it's really, we had a pretty strong conversation yesterday, and I think we hit some pretty deep core feelings of what I'm going through, and I want to try to kind of reiterate that now as we were talking, because just in the last few years of the things we've seen go on politically. And I don't want to make this red versus blue, because there's a lot of division. And I think right now, after the inauguration, there's probably some people that are feeling hope that we have a new administration to bring some maybe some new life to our country and new hope and things like that. For some of us, there were election irregularities, as I will call them, as a politically correct way of saying it. And almost this disillusion of our democratic process and how things are just unfolding. And pretty much I'm really tired of it. And I feel like, justice really is a thing in the past in America and so forth. And it was almost, how did you say it? It's like the death of an idol, I think is what you said. That, and it's almost like a grieving process, a realization on that. So it's a certain amount of frustration, and if it is truly a grieving process, it's going to take time. There's going to be anger, there's going to be denial, then there's acceptance and things like that. But regardless of that, I would like you to give us a little encouragement of where we go from here, what things are. I mean, we're still cooped up in our homes. We have our stay-at-home order. And as a church, we want to be able to spread the gospel. We want to be able to encourage people. We want to be able to be generous to people. So what can we do? Just ignoring the stuff that we just talked about.
Right.
Turning over a new leaf. What do we do to be on board for what God wants us to do in our lives right now?
Okay, so let me explain a little bit of the death of an idol. Because it's shocking language, but I think it helps you to see for most people. Because we don't like to think of that we have idols, but anything that you allow to take the place of God, anything you love more than God, anything that has a higher place in your life, I would say anything that you're hoping in more than God, that's pretty much an idol. And so what happened when your candidate didn't get elected was all of a sudden you found out where your hope was. And my hope was in this political dude getting elected, and he didn't get elected. And then my hope was, well, the corruption will be figured out before the time. And then I was hoping that last minute something's going to work out in the court cases or something. But ultimately, the hope was there that this is what it's going to be. And I think a lot of that hope is based, again, in the idea that somehow America stands for something, this truth and justice kind of thing. And that we're a Christian nation. And I think that's a lot of it. And it didn't help with the rhetoric of church leaders who stood up and said, Trump's going to win and he's our guy and this is whatever. And so when that didn't happen, I like that we talked about this the other day, the whole Thor, if you guys haven't watched Endgame. So in Infinity War, I'm going to give it away if you haven't watched it, Thanos wins, right? He snaps his finger, half the universe is gone. When they're all gone, you get to Endgame, they start the movie, and you find, well, this is kind of after the movie gets started, but they kill Thanos. But they're not able to reverse what he did. They can't figure it out. And so everybody kind of goes their own ways. Well, they go back and they're bringing back the team back together, and they go to find Thor. And Thor is now in a little village in Sweden somewhere, and Thor has let himself go, right? So he has what you called
a dad bod.
Right. So he's got
no
a big
longer
old beer
the heroic
gut.
Thor. He's got this big old gut.
Yeah.
And he's depressed.
Yeah. And so we were talking about that, and you said, man, I feel like Thor with dad bod, right?
Yeah.
That I've just finally given up. There's nothing. There's this sense of what does it even matter anymore kind of thing. And a lot of people feel that. And I think that's because that reveals that hidden thing that's down there that I was really hoping on and I was really hanging on to, that was not my faith. It wasn't Jesus. That wasn't, that's the thing. And so when that happens and then that idol gets smashed, we never like it. It's a painful thing, but it's actually a good thing, right? When those idols are smashed, because now we can no longer run to that idol. Now we're back to running to God, and a lot of times our eyes are open and stuff like that. And so it is. And one of the things you said, well, what do we do? How do we protest? Do we do this? Do we do that? And I said, of course, if you can do it in a way that people know you're a Christian, that's great. But I said, here's the thing we do is we reset. We remind ourselves that we're ambassadors, right? That this is not our home. That we live in a foreign country, right? And that we've been sent here by the King on a mission. And we have to remind ourselves that our job here is to share a message of reconciliation with a lost world. And if we as a church, if we recalibrate and we said, you know what, our goal isn't to change Washington, D.C., our goal is to change the valley, right? My goal is to change my neighborhood or the folks at work that I work around, or at my school and my class. And if we made that our goal and we just said, we're going to focus on this little area that God has given us, and we're going to pursue after him, and we're going to seek to build the kingdom here, then I trust, right? God raised up a guy like Daniel, who was he was a high government official in 2 different reigns. He raised up Esther, right, for such a time as this. And Joseph got to be the second person in the kingdom in Egypt. That God raises up people of influence who are believers who can influence those guys in Washington. I believe you can do that, or in Sacramento, or wherever you might be. And so if we trust that and we're praying for those folks, man, what would happen if Biden became a believer? What would happen if Kamala Harris became a believer, or Gavin Newsom, or what would happen? How would it be different if we actually, instead of shaking our fists at the sky and calling down imprecations on them, what if we actually prayed for them? And God worked a miracle, and they were brought from death to life, and everything changed, So that's kind of where I would leave it. All this other stuff, my goal isn't to point fingers and to say we did things right and other people did things wrong or whatever. My goal is simply to say, man, what does the Bible have to say about the times that we're living in, and how do we live the Christian life, knowing that we're in a culture that has a very different message on what it means to succeed and to actually thrive, right? That as a Christian, we don't thrive by putting our feet on somebody else's head and stepping on them. We don't thrive by being the first. We don't thrive by that. Jesus said, the one who will be great among you, it will be your servant. The one who's going to be first will be the slave of all, right? And I think that's kind of the attitude that we're supposed to have. So,
and I kind of want to bring it back to where we kind of started the conversation with when we started talking about meeting outdoors. Mm-hmm. And we thought, okay, yeah, well, if that's the best we can do, we're going to do it. But I have to say, I have really, really enjoyed our outdoor services. I absolutely love seeing the families gathered together, listening to God's word be proclaimed, singing praise songs to God. And you see like little kids, walking around, you hear a little bit of laughter in the background from the kids. The joy, I mean, in this dark time that we're going through, to hear the children's laughter behind me or beside me, or seeing, the bubbles that are sometimes given away in the packages that we give the kids for the little Sunday school lessons that we can't currently have right now. But seeing those little bubbles come floating through, you see the birds flying around, the blue sky, the sunshine. I absolutely love it. And to me, it's encouraging. We have guests coming each week, checking out Central. I just have to say, if you have not gone or come to any of our outdoor services, if you're feeling down and you've been in your home, come to our outdoor services. They are uplifting. I'm fighting this dad bod thing of Thor, just like everyone else, but I will say I can't wait to come to here on Sundays for our outdoor services. Good. I love listening to the word be proclaimed and singing with everyone else. Yeah, we're wearing masks, but I love it. I love seeing people. It's safe for everyone. Right. But it's made me reevaluate what is important. And I've been a political junkie for quite some time. I've had an interest in politics, in civics and government since I've been in first grade. I mean, Nixon resigned due to Watergate when I was in first grade, and I started following that. Watched every president. I'm old. I'm old. I know you don't think it, but I've watched every single presidential election since Carter versus Ford in 1976. I've watched Senate hearings. But sometimes I'm thinking now, it's like, I think I need to pull back from some of that. It's an interest of mine, but I really got to find out what God wants me to do right now in this time period. I mean, he's called us to live in this time period because, well, you're living here and I'm living here in this time period. He called us in this time period, and we want to finish strong. We want to be able to do what God's called us to do. So thank you for spending the time with us today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I think you might have seen a different side of Pastor Matt than you do on Sunday mornings when he's giving the message. But I know you felt this was an important thing for you to be able to reach out to the congregation. It's a little bit more in depth than you can go on a Sunday morning, because if we went this long, you'd be here probably for 3 hours outside, 3 hours online. So hopefully this is a supplemental type of teaching for you. And I'm really looking forward to the rest of this series and what the other topics are going to be like. So thank you, Pastor Matt, for being with us today. And I hope you guys have enjoyed our first episode of How Then Shall We Live.